Most of the tools we use today are designed to be replaced. That sounds obvious until you realize how strange it would have felt to someone living in the medieval world. For them, a tool was expected to last a lifetime, and often longer than that, not because medieval people were better craftsmen, not because the materials were magical, but because the system surrounding tools made frequent failure impossible to tolerate. When a tool broke, work stopped. Repair followed immediately, and that pressure shaped how tools were made in the first place. Modern tools don't last less because we've forgotten how to build them. They last less because the system no longer demands endurance. For most of human history, tools were not expected to wear out quickly. They were expected to stay. A farming tool, a woodworking tool, a household implement, these were not short-term solutions. They were acquired with the assumption that they would be used daily, repaired when damaged, and still be working long after the original owner was gone. This wasn't symbolic durability, it was practical. Tools moved through generations because replacing them was difficult, expensive, and disruptive. Metal took time to produce. Skilled labor was local and limited. Transport was slow. Losing a tool meant losing work, not just convenience. So tools were treated differently from the beginning. They were made thick enough to survive repeated sharpening. Handles were designed to be removed and replaced. Parts were not sealed permanently. Wear was assumed, failure was anticipated. A tool was not finished when it left the maker's hands. It was expected to change over time. That expectation shaped everything. A blade growing thinner was not a flaw, it was proof of use. A handle darkened by years of grip was not damage, it was history. Tools aged visibly, and that aging was accepted as part of their function. What's important here is what didn't matter. Tools did not need to look perfect. They did not need to remain identical to how they were first made. They only needed to keep working. This is the inversion modern viewers often miss. We tend to assume durability comes from superior craftsmanship, better materials, or lost skills. But medieval tools were often uneven, rough, and inconsistent by modern manufacturing standards. What made them last was not excellence. It was expectation. Everyone involved, the maker, the user, the next owner, assumed the tool would remain in circulation. That assumption created pressure. Pressure to repair, pressure to maintain, pressure to avoid designs that failed prematurely. A tool that broke early was not shrugged off. It became a problem. It meant lost time, lost labor, lost trust. And those costs landed immediately on the people closest to the failure. There was no buffer, no abstraction, no replacement pipeline to absorb the mistake. So tools were built to avoid becoming problems. Not because people were sentimental about objects, but because systems punished fragility. And that is the key shift. Medieval tools did not last because people loved durability. They lasted because durability was enforced by circumstance. Once you see that, longevity stops looking like a mysterious achievement of the past and starts looking like the natural result of a system that could not tolerate frequent failure. Durability did not emerge from preference, it emerged from pressure. Medieval societies operated under constant material limits. Resources were finite, local, and slow to replace. Metal did not arrive on demand. Wood was shaped by hand. Every object represented time, effort, and opportunity cost. A broken tool was not an inconvenience, it was a disruption. If a farming tool failed during harvest, crops waited. If a carpenter's tool failed during construction, work stopped. If a household tool broke, daily routines became harder immediately. There was no warehouse to draw from, no identical replacement waiting nearby. Scarcity enforced seriousness. People could not afford to treat tools casually because tools were directly tied to survival and productivity. A fragile design didn't just disappoint, it created risk. This changed how tools were made. Durability was built into form rather than added as a feature. Thickness allowed for repeated reshaping. Simplicity reduced points of failure. Components were designed to be separated, not sealed. A tool was expected to be opened, adjusted, and altered over time. Just as important was where knowledge lived. Repair skills were not outsourced, they were embedded in the same communities that used the tools. The person who forged a blade often lived close enough to fix it. The person who used it understood how it failed. Knowledge stayed local because it had to. That proximity mattered. When failure happens near the people responsible for it, design improves quickly. Weaknesses become obvious. Solutions spread through observation, not manuals. A poorly made tool damaged the maker's standing. A reliable one strengthened it. Reputation enforced quality more effectively than regulation ever could. This created an environment where fragility had consequences beyond inconvenience. A maker who produced unreliable tools lost trust. A user who neglected maintenance paid the price directly. There was no abstraction layer to absorb mistakes. Durability was not a virtue, it was a requirement imposed by reality. And because tools stayed in circulation for so long, the system corrected itself naturally. Forms that failed disappeared. Designs that endured persisted, not because anyone declared them optimal, but because everything else became too costly to keep. This is what modern systems no longer replicate. Not skill, not materials, but pressure. And once pressure disappears, durability stops being enforced at all. When a medieval tool failed, there was no delay between cause and consequence. The cost arrived immediately. Work slowed or stopped. Tasks backed up. Someone had to abandon what they were doing to fix the problem. Time was lost in daylight hours that could not be recovered. Food production slipped. Construction paused. The failure was felt in real time. That immediacy mattered. There was no distance between the person who experienced the failure and the failure itself. You didn't submit a claim. You didn't wait for approval. You didn't replace the tool and move on. You dealt with the problem because nothing else could continue until you did. This created a tight feedback loop. The moment something broke, its weakness became visible. How it failed mattered. Where it cracked mattered. Whether it could be repaired mattered. These details weren't abstract. They determined how long work would be interrupted and how much effort repair would require. That information stayed with people. A tool that failed the same way twice was remembered. A design that wore down too quickly was noticed. Word spread informally through use and observation, not through instruction manuals or reviews. Failure taught. Repair reinforced that lesson. When a tool was fixed, it often came back changed, reinforced where it had broken, simplified where it had failed. The object improved through interaction, not redesign cycles. Each repair carried knowledge forward. There was also no way to hide waste. Discarding a tool meant discarding value that had been paid for in labor. Broken tools did not vanish into trash systems. They remained visible reminders of loss. Material scarcity made throwing something away a decision with consequences, not a reflex. This visibility shaped behavior. People handled tools carefully because damage mattered. Makers refined designs because reputation mattered. Users maintained tools because neglect had immediate cost. Everyone involved felt the outcome of fragility directly. Modern systems interrupt this loop. Failure is delayed, absorbed, or hidden. Replacement arrives faster than understanding. The lesson is skipped because the inconvenience is short-lived. In medieval systems, the lesson was unavoidable. And when lessons cannot be avoided, behavior changes. Durability doesn't need to be argued for. It emerges naturally. The system that enforced durability did not disappear overnight. It was replaced gradually. As production scaled up, tools stopped being local objects. They became distant ones. Materials were sourced far away. Manufacturing moved out of sight. The people who designed tools no longer met the people who used them. That distance mattered. When a tool failed, the failure no longer returned information to the maker. It disappeared into a warranty claim, a return bin, or a replacement order. The cost was absorbed by logistics rather than felt personally. Mass production changed priorities. Speed mattered more than longevity. Uniformity mattered more than repairability. Tools were designed to perform reliably for a short window rather than endure indefinitely. Components were sealed. Materials were mixed in ways that made disassembly difficult. None of this required bad intent. It followed scale. When millions of identical tools are produced, repairing one individual unit makes less sense than replacing it. Repair becomes inefficient. Replacement becomes normal. The system adapts accordingly. Supply chains reinforced this shift. Global transport made replacement fast and cheap relative to labor. A broken tool no longer stopped work for long. Another one could arrive quickly. The interruption shrank. The lesson weakened. At the same time, repair knowledge drifted away. Skills that once lived in every community became specialized, centralized, or unnecessary. Instructions replaced understanding. Maintenance turned into compliance rather than judgment. Failure became abstract. A tool breaking no longer felt like a design problem or a personal loss. It felt like part of the life cycle, something expected, something accounted for. And once failure is expected, durability stops being enforced, not because anyone decided it should, but because nothing in the system demands it anymore. As tools became easier to replace, something subtle began to disappear. People stopped learning how things fail. When a medieval tool broke, understanding the failure was unavoidable. You had to see where it cracked, how it bent, or why it wore down. Repair required attention. Attention created familiarity. Familiarity built competence. That chain no longer holds. Modern tools often fail in ways that are opaque. Plastic housings snap without warning. Internal components are sealed. Electronics stop responding without visible cause. The failure offers no information to the person holding the tool, so nothing is learned. Replacement steps in where understanding once lived. A broken tool is no longer a problem to be solved. It is a signal to acquire another one. The system trains users not to ask why. Over time, this reshapes behavior. People stop noticing early signs of wear. They stop adjusting technique to reduce stress on materials. They stop distinguishing between misuse and design weakness. The relationship between force, material, and failure fades from everyday awareness. This is not a decline in intelligence. It is a decline in necessity. When systems function without requiring understanding, competence becomes optional. Skills that are not required do not persist. Repair turns from a normal response into a specialized hobby. Dependence replaces mastery. Not dependence on tools themselves, but on the system that supplies them. When something breaks, the solution is external. Someone else designed it. Someone else fixes it. Someone else decides when it is no longer worth keeping. This distance changes expectations. A tool is no longer something you grow familiar with over years. It is something you use until it stops responding. There is no accumulated knowledge, only usage. And when competence fades, durability loses its strongest advocate, because durability is defended not by sentiment, but by understanding. You protect what you know how to maintain. You value what you understand well enough to fix. When tools stop teaching people how they fail, people stop demanding that they endure. And once that happens, fragility doesn't feel like a flaw. It feels normal. For most of history, tools were not owned in isolation. They existed inside a line of use. A tool entered a household, a workshop, or a field with the assumption that it would remain there for years. When the original owner aged, the tool did not leave. When someone died, the tool stayed. It passed into other hands already shaped by use. Continuity was built into expectation. Because tools were scarce and costly, it made sense to think beyond individual ownership. A well-made tool was not mine. It was ours, in the sense that it would be used by others long after the first person was finished with it. This changed how tools were treated. Damage was not framed as inconvenience to one person. It was a loss to the future. Care was not sentimental, it was practical. A tool neglected today created work tomorrow, for someone you knew or someone you would never meet. That long horizon enforced restraint. A design that wore out quickly failed not just one user, but everyone who came after. That failure was visible across time. A tool that endured earned trust not once but repeatedly. Modern tools do not live inside that timeline. They are designed for single ownership cycles. When a tool is purchased today, it is assumed to belong to one person for one phase of use before being replaced. There is no expectation of inheritance. no assumption of long-term circulation. That assumption changes design incentives completely. If a tool is not expected to exist beyond its first owner, there is no pressure to make it easily repairable after years of wear. If it will be replaced anyway, continuity becomes irrelevant. Durability disappears quietly. Not because materials are weaker, but because future use no longer matters enough to defend. A tool only needs to survive long enough to satisfy its immediate purpose. This is why wear now feels like failure. In medieval systems, wear was proof of life. It marked continuity. It meant the tool was still participating in work across time. In modern systems, wear signals obsolescence. It tells you replacement is approaching. The same physical change carries opposite meaning. Continuity used to stretch responsibility forward. Disposability collapses responsibility inward. A tool is no longer part of a shared future. It is part of a private present. And once tools stop belonging to time, durability stops making sense as a design priority. It becomes optional. Once you recognize this pattern in tools, it becomes difficult to confine it to tools alone. The same logic appears wherever systems grow large enough to absorb failure without feeling it. When responsibility stretches across distance, durability weakens. When consequences are delayed, fragility becomes manageable. You see it in objects that were once expected to last and are now expected to be replaced. You see it in systems where repair happens only after breakdown, not before. You see it in designs that work perfectly until the moment they suddenly don't, with no visible path back. What connects all of this is not carelessness, it is insulation. Modern systems are extremely good at protecting users from the cost of failure. When something stops working, life rarely stops with it. Alternatives exist, replacements arrive quickly, the disruption is brief. That efficiency feels like progress, but it also removes pressure. When failure no longer interrupts work, learning slows. When breakdowns no longer carry memory, designs stop evolving through consequence. Fragility spreads not because it is preferred, but because it is tolerated. This tolerance reshapes expectation. People stop assuming that things should endure. Instead, they assume that systems will compensate. The burden shifts away from the object and onto the infrastructure around it. Medieval tools survived because they had nowhere to hide their weaknesses. Modern tools fail quietly because the system around them absorbs the cost. And once fragility becomes invisible, it becomes normal. At this point, it's tempting to frame modern tools as failures, but that would miss the point. Modern tools are not poorly designed. They are designed for a different environment. They are optimized for speed, scale, and availability. They are meant to be produced quickly, shipped widely, and replaced efficiently. Fragility is not an accident in this system. It is a trade-off. When tools are easy to replace, they do not need to endure indefinitely. When repair is costly relative to replacement, designs follow that logic. When users are insulated from failure, durability loses its urgency. Nothing about this requires neglect or deception. It emerges naturally from the incentives built into the system. A tool that lasts forever is unnecessary when the system surrounding it guarantees fast replacement and minimal disruption. Medieval tools lasted because they had to. Modern tools fail because they are allowed to. This doesn't make one era virtuous and the other flawed. It means they answer different questions. One prioritizes continuity, the other prioritizes convenience. And once you see that, the issue stops being about craftsmanship entirely. It becomes about what systems demand. For a long time, we've treated durability as a material problem. Better steel, stronger plastics, smarter engineering. But medieval tools weren't durable because of what they were made from. They were durable because failure mattered. When something broke, work stopped. Time was lost. Effort was wasted. Responsibility had a face. Consequences stayed close. Tools had to endure because the system around them would not soften the impact if they didn't. Modern systems do soften it. They absorb failure quietly. They replace instead of repair. They remove the need to understand why something broke at all. Fragility doesn't feel dangerous when it's cushioned by speed and availability. So durability fades, not as a mistake, but as a signal that permanence is no longer required. And once you notice that, medieval tools stop looking like relics of superior craftsmanship and start looking like objects shaped by a world that could not afford for things to fall apart.